Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Perello. I'm your host here at the Philly Factor, and today we are joined by author Jack McCarthy. He has written a marvelous book, A Century of Music Under the Stars. It's all about that gem of a venue in Fairmount Park, the Mann Music Center and the Robin Hood Dell. And everybody has a memorable story to tell about the Mann Music Center and the Dell. The Mann Center for the Performing Arts, as it's officially known, to the Robin Hood Dell. The Mann and the Dell are part of the landscape of Philadelphia arts and culture. And Jack McCarthy joins us here to talk about this wonderful book. And it is indeed a wonderful book. I'm going to hold it up here. I don't know what the glare there. I mean, if there is anything, Jack, that you want to know about the Mann Music Center or the Robin Hood Dell, it's all in your book. So what a wonderful job in celebrating both these venues in Philadelphia.
Well, thank you. It was really fun to research and write it. I've been researching and writing about Philadelphia music for many, many years. And you always learn something new. There's always some great new stories to uncover. And I was doing that time and time again in writing this book. In fact, when we started out, it was envisioned as a real coffee table book, meaning very high on photos and kind of lighter on text. Sort of very image heavy, more of a visual thing. But I was
Sure.
uncovering all these fascinating stories, and important stories, and really interesting. Some of them humorous, some of them tragic. And so it became obvious that it really needed to be an out and out history book. A
Yeah.
real history book. So it is that, but it's also because of its original intention. It's also got a lot of images, over 200 images. So it's a very highly illustrated history book. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask the question: what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it the Mann or was it the Dell, or did they both arrive on the landscape at the same time?
Oh no, very much one after the other. So the Robin Hood Dell opened in 1930 as a summer home for the Philadelphia Orchestra. There's a lot of civic and music leaders in Philadelphia at that time felt like we have one of the world's greatest orchestras, and only the people that can afford tickets to the Academy of Music downtown, during the regular season are able to go. We need to make this unbelievable ensemble more accessible to the public. So a bunch of civic and community leaders, political leaders, all got together and arranged to open the Robin Hood Dell in 1930. And it was the summer home of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And then, fast forward, 45 years or so, for a lot of reasons, the Dell was no longer an appropriate home for the orchestra. So they began to look for another location, and they found this place in West Fairmount Park, because the original Dell was in East Fairmount Park on the east
Okay.
bank of the Schuylkill River. So they built this modern new facility that opened in June of 1976. Originally, it was called Robin Hood Dell West, and the original Dell was called the Robin Hood Dell East. And then
Mhm.
later, they renamed the Dell West the Frederick R. Mann Music Center in honor of Frederick Mann, who was the sort of driving force behind the whole enterprise. So, it was the Robin Hood Dell for like 45 years, and then came the Mann Center. But the Dell kept going. The city of Philadelphia took it over, and the city Parks and Rec Department manages it, and it still puts on concerts there, but it's
Mhm.
no longer the Philadelphia Orchestra home.
I
And then,
see.
of course, the Robin Hood Dell West and eventually the Mann Center evolved to much more than just the Philadelphia Orchestra. It every kind of music now: rock, pop, jazz, ballet, and everything you could think of, rap and soul and funk and R&B, and so the Philadelphia Orchestra, it's still their summer home here in Philadelphia, but the Mann Center offers a much wider range of music.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the types of music that people when they come out to the Mann Center can experience. But in just looking at in the book as well as through my notes here, really anybody who's anybody in the entertainment industry has probably performed at the Mann Center for the Performing Arts.
Yeah, it's really one of the great summer music venues in the country. So yeah, all the top artists, this year Paul Simon is coming back. James Taylor has been there a million times. And yeah, Bob Dylan has been there, James Brown, Aretha Franklin. I mean, you could just go on about all the great artists that have performed there.
Yeah. When you started researching the book, and when I mean, it seemed like a no-brainer. Okay, that the Philadelphia Orchestra would have a venue that would be more accessible to more people as opposed to the Academy of Music, during the warmer months. But was there any apprehension, like when they started to plan the Mann Center, that would we be able to attract these top name performers to come into Philadelphia and perform? I mean, it's not like they're performing on, a stage in downtown Philadelphia. They're performing not necessarily, Fairmount Park is the suburbs, but it's still outside of the center of the city. So was there any concern that they would be able to attract a talent to perform at the Mann Center?
Not really, because at the original Dell, all and again, this at that time it was strictly classical. They hadn't really begun, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The gradual introduction of pop and rock and other genres, and how that became more and more a part of the programming. But prior to moving to the Mann Center location in the old Robin Hood Dell, they had the top classical artists in the world. And the main reason for that was Frederick Mann. Everybody called him Freddie. He was a very wealthy, successful businessman and entrepreneur. He was also a government appointee. He had all kinds of positions, but his passion was classical music. And he was very good friends with the top um, performing artists in classical music in the world, Arthur Rubinstein and Isaac Stern, and you could just name them all. And so, he was very close friends with them. And so a lot of them came out of allegiance to him. Uh, and I mean, it was still, and of course, they were playing with the great Philadelphia Orchestra, right? So,
Sure.
so that's another incentive. But they had a track record since Freddie Mann became involved, which was in the late 1940s, of just bringing the best artists in the world to Philadelphia. Partly because these artists wanted to play in Philadelphia, wanted to play with the Philadelphia Orchestra, but partly because out of loyalty to Freddie Mann. And so Freddie sort of oversaw the move to the new facility. Part of the reason that they needed to move, well, one was the weather. The old Dell was completely uncovered and open to the elements. So rainouts or even the threat of bad weather would keep the crowds away. It was just, a real problem. But then the other thing was that in late 1959, the Schuylkill Expressway opened just on the other side of the Schuylkill River. And literally it was all just the expressway, and then this body of water, and then the Dell stage, and the traffic noise was just really bothersome and really disturbed the concert experience. So a lot of artists were complaining, the musicians were complaining. So it really became obvious that if you really want to attract the top name, or continue to attract the top level artists in the classical world, we need a better situated facility. So when they moved, it was guaranteed that the artists would continue to come because Freddie was still in charge and he was still bringing them all in. So yeah, I don't think that was ever a concern.
Hmm. Um, as time progresses, then, and the Mann and the Dell are popular venues, the entertainment industry landscape begins to change. So you have, the casinos pop up in Atlantic City, and then there were venues out in the suburbs, the Valley Forge Music Fair. So, did these places present a problem for the Mann and the Dell to attract people to come to Philadelphia when they could perform in the round in Valley Forge? Now, obviously, Valley Forge no longer exists, but I would suspect that when these other entertainment venues started popping up, it became more of a challenge to book performers at the Dell and the Man because of these other venues that were popping up both in Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Um, Again, if you're separating the classical from the pop and rock world, in the classical world, the only real competition locally for the Dell and then the Man was the Temple University Music Festival at Ambler,
Okay.
which was opened for I think I don't know 11 years, I forget, 15 years, from the mid 60s to the early 80s, I think. And they were bringing in top name classical orchestras and uh, performing artists. So that was some competition because that was right in the area. That was
Mm-hmm.
Ambler, was
Sure.
10 miles away or something. So that was competition, but that eventually folded. But I think all the other venues that you mentioned really weren't real competition because they weren't presenting like the Philadelphia Orchestra and Zubin Mehta or Daniel Barenboim, or I mean, they were not presenting the level of talent that the Dell and later the Man were. Freddie Mann had this philosophy that you don't dumb down the repertoire for the summer audience. He wanted it to be the same artistic level of excellence and repertoire that you would see in the Academy of Music or later the Kimmel Center. In the regular season, he wanted that to be accessible to the mass of people during the summer at a very affordable rate. So,
Mm-hmm.
he was presenting the same, standard of music, and it really was not what Valley Forge Music Fair was presenting, or some of these local venues. And again, the Temple Ambler facility was sort of competition, but it didn't last that long. The
Sure.
real thing that really was a problem for the Man was much later after Freddie Mann had died. So when the Man opened in 1976, Freddie realized that the audience for classical music was shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
That it just wasn't, the classical music, symphonic music was not drawing the audiences on a reliable basis like it had been, earlier, decades earlier. And he knew he had to diversify. So he brought in Electric Factory Concerts, Larry Magid, which was one of the biggest pop and rock promoters in the world, really, but they're Philadelphia based. And so they began to present popular music, a series of popular, and that was starting in the very first season that the Man opened in 1976. The very first non-classical artist was James Taylor. And they it was more of a sort of soft rock and pop. It was James Taylor, it was Barry Manilow, people like that. It wasn't like hard rock. But they began presenting popular music, and over time that became more and more of what the Man relied on for the ticket sales. Like the classical music wasn't really supporting the facility anymore. It was the pop and rock shows. What happened was in 1995, what was called the E Center, it's now the Freedom Mortgage Pavilion, but in Camden, the outdoor facility in Camden opened. And then they made Larry Magid a really lucrative offer, and he took his company over to Camden and started producing the pop and rock shows there. And because he was such a top level promoter, and everybody respected and worked with him, all the great rock and pop artists, that all the top artists began going there instead of coming to the Man. And so the Man began to suffer because now it wasn't drawing the revenue that it had been from the pop and rock world. And that was all going to Camden. And the Man was still presenting pop and rock, but not the top level artists like they had been. So that really was a major blow to the Man. So the 90s and into the early 2000s was a very challenging time. It's all different now.
Sure.
The Man is now partnered with Live Nation, which is the biggest concert promoter in the world, and so they do now get the top rock acts again. But that was the real competition, starting in the mid '90s.
Was there ever the risk of the Man and the Dell, for that matter, going out of business as entertainment choices and entertainment values amongst people in Philadelphia or even the suburbs started to change? I mean, you talked about how symphonic music started to fade away, the interest in it started to fade away. I mean, was there any concern that these two venues could pretty much disappear from the landscape of Philadelphia?
Yes, absolutely. And I recount all this in the book. Actually, the biggest, well, not the biggest, but yeah, I guess the biggest crisis was years ago in 1948. They had to close down. Again, it's now still strictly a classical venue at this point, Robin Hood Dell East.
Mm-hmm.
And they ran out of money and they had to cancel the remainder of the 1948 season. And that's when Freddie Mann came on board. The board of directors knew who he was and what he could do, and they asked him to come in. He said, "Okay, I'll come in, I'll rescue this place, but I have to have complete control." And so they gave that to him. He became president, and then he revived the Dell, starting in the 1949 season, and then he managed it for almost 40 years. So that was the one crisis. But then when Catherine Cahill came on, Kathy Cahill, I think it was 2008. They were in another financial crisis, and it's because of the reason I mentioned earlier. Um, Electric Factory Concerts had basically taken all their best acts over to Camden, and the rock and pop revenue was not as strong as it had been, and the costs of presenting the orchestra were rising at the same time. So it became increasingly costly for the Man to present the orchestra at the same time that the revenue from the rock and pop, the cash cow that had been supporting it, was drying up. So when she came on board, it was actually in a major fiscal crisis. And the other contributing factor was this was the 2007, 2008 Great Recession. If you remember, we had a major economic recession in that period. And so a lot of, financial support, philanthropic funding, all that kind of stuff was drying up. So that was a real crisis point when she arrived. And she, like Freddie Mann before her, basically kind of rescued the Man and brought it back to stability and sustainability and popularity. But yeah, and there were points along the way. It's been like almost 100 years when you go back to the Dell. There were many points along the way where things were very precarious. Thankfully, we are not in one of those periods now as the Man celebrates its 50th anniversary.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and it's a great time to celebrate the Man, especially in this year where so much attention is going to be on the city of Philadelphia for America 250, the 250th anniversary of the birth of the United States of America. Um, when you started to research this book, I mean, 50 years doesn't seem like, I mean, okay, when you look at 250 years of America, 50 years is just like a snapshot, if you will. But given all the history that's there with the Dell and with the Man, I mean, how long did it take you for research and getting everything together before the book was actually published?
Several years for sure. Before I started actually writing a quote unquote book, I was doing a number of historical blog posts and articles for the Man Center. So I was doing these little historical vignettes. I would talk about, Eugene Normandy's debut there or somebody else's debut. Or so I was writing all these vignettes and collecting all these stories. So I had a good bit of research done, but it was just these little isolated stories here and there. And then when we decided to actually write a book, like a chronological chronicling of the entire almost 100 years, that from that point on, it was probably at least 2 to 3 years of research before it was ready for publication.
And then all the wonderful photographs that you have in the book. That's a whole other thing because, I know one thing that, there are so many archives that are out there where you could go and find these images. But the tendency is like there are probably more images than you have pages right now in the book. So how do you whittle down all those photos and all that artwork to to fit what you need to put in the book.
Yeah, that there were some painful choices. I really want to include this photo, but we can't. I mean, Temple University Press, who were fantastic, a fantastic partner in publishing the book. They
Sure.
were very flexible and working with us and including more. I mean, but we put in many more photos than we originally allotted. But even that required some very painful decisions. However, in 2030, it's going to be the 100th anniversary of the Robin Hood Dell.
You see.
And that's going to be the 100th anniversary of the organization. So this year is the 50th anniversary of the venue, the Mann
Right.
Center. But in 4 years, it's going to be the 100th anniversary of the entire organization. So
Right.
we are going to do a real coffee table book. For that, it will be heavy on images, not so much on text, captions and a little bit of contextual stuff. So my saving grace in all these decisions, well, we'll put that in the next book.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
was going
yeah,
to. You sort of stole my thunder with my next question because I'm like, oh, I see where this is going. There's going to be another book in a few
yeah,
years. Yeah, for sure. Well,
yeah. So,
good. That's great to know. And
yeah,
and we won't have to wait another 20 years before you're back on the show to
yeah,
discuss
maybe
that.
in 4 years we can
Yeah,
meet again. Yeah, instead of 20.
yeah. How has the book been received? I mean, not only amongst the people at the Mann Center for the Performing Arts and Robin Hood Dell, but with because I'm sure that both venues have their recurring patrons. I mean, they're buying those season tickets year after year. They're coming back and they're buying the packages to see shows at both places. So, what has been the feedback from those people?
Well, first of all, the book came out during the off season of the Mann, right? The Mann is closed from like
Sure.
October through like April. So the ticket buying public is not going to be returning for another couple of months. So
Hmm.
it's really hard to tell with that. I mean, we're hoping that once people start coming and the book is there, the other sort of related to that is the Mann, as at this point as we speak, is undergoing a dramatic renovation. The exterior,
Sure.
like the entire entry area and plaza is being redone, but there's also going to be a visitor center with a museum, a hall of fame and historical displays and interactive historical sections, so
Hmm.
people can come and experience some of this history in that way. And so we're hoping that when that happens and the book is there for sale, that there'll be a lot of people buying it. So, but that part of the audience hasn't really returned yet.
Sure.
And otherwise, I mean, the reception has been very positive. People are very pleased with it. I frankly don't know what the sales numbers are. I haven't heard that from
Hmm.
Temple Press, but everywhere I talk and everywhere I go, like people like you are very complimentary. So, and then the people that were involved in the story and that got copies of the book have been very enthusiastic. So, I mean, the reception has been very positive.
Yeah. I mean, with all the money that's been going into the infrastructure and sprucing up the Mann and refurbishing the Mann, was there ever any talk back in the day of relocating either one or both of the venues out of Fairmount Park to and build something from the ground up?
That was never a consideration. It was always so. And I talk about this in the book too. What separates the Mann Center and prior to that the Dell from the other summer homes of major orchestras is that it is in and of the city of its home orchestra. Tanglewood is hundreds of miles from Boston, the summer home of the Boston Symphony. Saratoga is hundreds of, well, maybe not hundreds, but way outside of New York City. And a lot of the Wolf Trap in Washington is in the suburbs of Washington D.C. It's not in the city. Uh, the Mann Center is in the city and of the city. Its home orchestra is the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it is in the city. So it was always uppermost in everyone's mind, from Freddie Mann on down, that we are part of the fabric of this community. we're not going to move actually Governor Milton Shapp wanted to build a summer home for the Philadelphia Orchestra in the Poconos. He really did. And there was actually some serious movement in that regard. Freddie Mann was like adamantly opposed, and it never happened. But I guess that was the 70s, maybe. But, it was always the priority of the Robin Hood Dell and the Mann to be part of the fabric of the community and to be really in and of the city of Philadelphia. So when you go to the Mann Center and you look at that spectacular view of the skyline, you're in Philadelphia. You're not out, 100 miles away in western part of the state or something. You're right in the city. So yeah, that was always a part of the Mann's identity.
Yeah. Well, again, congratulations on a wonderful book. It is a page turner. There are so many stories in there, and we've just scratched the surface, needless to say. And we look forward to the next book that's going to be coming out in a few years. And Jack, we'll have you back on and discuss that. And I want to thank you for your time and your great work on this book, because truly, both the Mann and the Dell, two diamonds in the crown of Philadelphia when it comes to art and culture of the city of Philadelphia. And you've done a wonderful job in capturing that and putting that in book form. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Jack McCarthy, our guest here on this edition of the Philly Factor. Again, the name of the book, A Century of Music Under the Stars. And until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul Perrello. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Philly Factor, and we'll catch you next time around.